Welcome to Investor Hangouts, brought to you by Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund and Value Research. We are doing three-part series of financial independence. This is the second part of the three series of Investor Hangouts. And the first part we covered about how millennials can look at their financial independence. This part we are looking at to get an advice on financial independence for the young couple, working couple who start their financial life, family life to start with. Today we have two important guests with us. Of course, Value Research CEO Mr. Dhiren, and this is his 101st episode of Investor Hangouts. And with me, we have our co-CIO Mr. Mahesh Patil, and glad to have both of them. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And indeed, it's a great honor to have both of you here for Investor Hangouts. And glad we can take the questions with both of them. I think end of the session we have questions to be answered by them. I start this session with the first question with Mr. Dhirendra. Dhirendra, starting family often brings a point of inflection in the finances. How do you advise for the couple who are just starting their finances to start with?
You're still in the formative years of your investments, because people save. Generally, people save more so when they're setting up the family. They become concerned about the financial well-being, or do they have enough for any. So, but that is not. It requires little careful thinking. It requires careful thinking because your circumstances are very opposite. You are setting up a family. Your income is low. You are young. Your financial, if your spouse happens to be a financially dependent, then your need for insurance is very high. Your need for, and you don't have enough, your need for setting up a home and all those things could be there. You will be tempted to borrow to buy a car, borrow to buy a household stuff. At the same time, and this can actually derail your savings habit. This can derail your investment habit. So I would say that the only thing one should be conscious of at such stage of the family, when you are getting started, that do everything, but don't spoil the hierarchy of things. Ensure that you have the emergency fund. Ensure that you have the term insurance for the financial dependent. Ensure that you have the health insurance, and continue with some money of investment. Whether that be small, it doesn't matter. So sticking to this plan is crucial, and rest of the money you spend depending, because this is a very difficult phase. Your income is low, your needs are phenomenal, and suddenly everything has changed.
Thanks, Dhiren, for that nice way to start the momentum. But if I look at for you this question again, I can put if somebody is a young couple or to be the parent, but how do you look at their financial planning to start with?
No, I find that most people don't start with a financial plan. They look for an opportunistic investment. But it's important that, if you don't have a financial plan, basic financial plan, and it does not require a great financial planner to be spending a lot of time, ensuring that you have the emergency fund, which is, depending on your circumstances, 2 to 3 months, 6 months of your, income requirement, the money which is needed for the household expenditure, it should be there handy, whether it is in the form of money in your wallet, money in the locker, money in a liquid fund, it's separate, but you should have that much. Having the health insurance is critical, and then starting with your investment, because sticking to an investment plan is important, that you are not losing you are not getting distracted from having enough at a future date, and time is crucial. Losing that initial time is a great disadvantage.
Thanks, Dhiren. It's indeed good advice. Mahesh, coming to you. Friends, we have Mahesh, he's our co-CIO, and Mahesh manages little over 1,00,000 crores of money in equity.
100,000 crore of equity assets, okay?
Yeah, 100,000 crores of equity assets Mahesh manages. And probably the questions to Mahesh, probably I look at today is to take his wisdom. And Mahesh, here is a question. Most of the hangouts, Dhiren gets hundreds of questions. Over last 100 episodes, we got 25,000 questions. And if I can scan through those questions, and answers from Dhiren goes, and for your long-term invest in equity, and long-term invest for your SIP, and invest in equity through SIP. But most of these, when I go to the investors, especially the young couple, when they look at, they would have just 2 years back, they started their SIP, or they have last 2 years. And in the last 2 years, if their SIP has not given the expected return, What use that you suggest to them to stay invest, or do they need to change something, or is that a allocation which is happening to them? Volatility is the nature of the market, but with your experience, what do you guide them?
Yeah, so I mean, when you start investing into equity, I think time is very important, right? How much time you are there in the market. There are instances where you see in equity markets, depending on how the market cycle is or the economic cycle, you will see periods where the market returns will probably be flattish or even negative for even 2-3 years. And that's why we always suggest that you start an SIP so that you capture the market at various points in the market, where there could be ups and downs in the market. In the last 2 years, the markets have been slightly, flattish, or even the broader market has been down. So people who are invested, say 2 years back or 3 years back, the SIP might not be yielding much returns. But I think, again, as I said earlier, we've seen various periods in the market. We go back in history in the last 25 years since I've been in the market. There have been periods where we've seen markets correcting by around 20-30%, even 40-50%, like the global financial crisis or the dot-com bust. Or more recently in 2013, we saw the market go down by almost 30%. And people who have stayed invested, and they look back on those sharp corrections in the market, and so those look like blips in the broader long-term trend of the market. And the worst thing is that people tend to get, when they see negative returns in the market or in the SIP returns, is to really pull out that investment. And that's where you need to have the courage to stay on, because that money which you continue to make in the market is what really determines your long-term returns. Because I think really to make money in the market is to stay invested, okay, in those periods, okay, when the market is negative, when there is a lot of fear, because that is what determines your long-term returns. So I would say for investors who have come, because last 2 years, many investors, new investors have come into the market for the first time. They are seeing the volatility in the equity. I think you need to keep the faith in the market. Equity is all about hope, but hope is not just banking on something without fundamentals. You have to see the long-term returns for equity, and they have been around 12-13%, and there's a convergence which happens over a long term. And Indian economy has gone through some kind of a slowdown in the last couple of years. I think we've seen corporate earnings have been depressed, and I think going forward, I think you should see a recovery going through, and market will really track that. So only advice would be to continue with the SIP. This is the last thing you should be doing at this point in time, to stop a SIP. And over a next 5-year time frame, you've seen as the time increases, the loss or the negative return in the market goes down.
Thanks, Mahesh. Thanks for that interesting answer. It definitely gives a conviction to the investor when they are investing during the confusing times, and he or she stays invested back. But another question to you, the follow-on question around, if the young couple, they stay invested, say for the longer term, you suggest they can just put in a SIP kind, or you want them to come as a lump sum?
No, so I think always this is a common question which comes across, and even for somebody who is first time investing and has not got much of an equity exposure and has got some corpus which is coming in because of some sale of asset, it's always advisable to spread that investment, at least 6 months, but even for a longer time frame. And because you don't know, right? I mean, equity, while each one would have market expert like us also have a view, but there are a lot of variables, okay, which drive equity markets. And because of the volatility in the market, we don't want anyone investing lump sum money into the market to have an experience, okay, in the near term which could be negative, and it puts unnecessary pressure. So it's always advisable to spread it out over say 1 year or even a larger time frame, and slowly build that exposure so that you tide over the short term volatility in the markets.
Thanks, Mahesh. I think your suggestion to them is come through the SIP route, or if you have a lump sum, come through the systematic transfer plan route.
Yeah, that's
to
right.
Stay
invested. And I'll come back to you, Dhiren. I mean, when it is coming to the young couple, the first couple, the moment this is they look for the house. I mean, they want to own a house. That is a sentiment, or they have an attachment to it. What do you advise? How they can go forward as a financial goal?
No, everybody should have a house, and everybody should have a house to live in it. don't speculate in buying a house. That's one. But now, after the nearly a decade of turmoil in the real estate sector, housing sector, so the first, you need to really formulate the rules for yourself. One is that never buy a house to be sold. You are going to buy a home, so it's not an investment. You are going to live in it, and there are advantages of it. You will be able to save the rent, you will be able to get some tax break, and you will be able to accumulate an asset which you otherwise don't have. And hopefully the asset price will go up faster than your cost of borrowing. So even borrowing is justified. Normally, no borrowing is justified for an individual except for buying a house or for emergency situations. That apart, but you should have your framework that 1/3 of your salary, of your income, of the family's income, should not go towards repayment of the loan, because that is actually a framework. It's a risk management for your family, because many a times people stretch beyond a point, and it's an aspirational thing. You will be thinking of having a home which will take care of your grandchildren's too, and that is why and it's an emotional decision. So have these financial rules around it, making sure that also the risk in this sector when you are buying a newly promoted project is that you may not get it. And I see it more in North India, the Delhi NCR region, where all the big builders are in jail. So there my issue is that buy something, one in the hand is always better than two, or a great thing in the bush. Don't wait for that. So just be extra cautious and go ahead and do it. Otherwise, Indians are very lucky to actually have the privilege of living, because of the glut and this oversupply. The rental yields are so low that you can live in a fancy house without owning it and without worrying about, and you can actually change your mind over time.
It's indeed a good one to at the end, Dhiren. I mean, it's very interesting. While house is an aspirational goal, but if you can postpone and you can stay in a rental income, you can enjoy. I think, Mahesh, I was reading one of the articles you have written some time back. And if I can postpone it's very interesting article, I can just recall. It's like, if I can postpone my house, rather I can start putting money into one of your funds and I stay invested for long, I would have bought more number of houses today. Probably, can you guide in a very different way to think, rather, how I can put my money into the equity rather than paying my EMI, probably equity monthly investment that could be a new EMI where it can fetch more houses for you.
So I think it's all boils down to what returns, long-term return each asset class has given. So we know historically, I mean, last 15, 20 years or 30 years data, if you look at it, investment in real estate would have given you a return on an average, right, around 9 to 10%, including the rental yield what you could get. Whereas equities would have given a return of around 14% or so. That's for the market. And actively managed funds have given returns say around 3% higher than that. So that is the long-term return what equities can deliver, and that extra return of whatever 5-6% return that equities deliver over a longer term, if you compound that over a long-term period, I think that's where the big difference comes in terms of what wealth you accumulate, say after 10-15 years. So that's where it is. That's why it's very important to start investing early into equities. Even like Dhirendra mentioned, even if it's a small amount, even if a new family, which is starting a family, you can start with small investments into equity. And buying a house is always a lumpy decision, right? There's a big outflow which happens. So, I mean, you can always borrow. I think, I mean, that's the only cheapest rate where you can borrow for buying a house, right? And then try to conserve whatever savings you have, and that invest and to build some corpus in equity, because in the longer run, that is where your wealth creation would be. I mean, always everybody wants to buy a house. So again, one can time that purchase. Very difficult to time the purchase, but always when the property cycle also goes through various cycles, just like the equity markets. And unless one sees the valuations in the property market are reasonable, I think it's better to stay in a rental property, because in India the rental yields are just about 2% or so, right? So, so one can in that interim try to whatever savings are there, one can invest into equity or any other instrument which has a potential to generate a larger wealth, and then at appropriate time Okay, when you find the right property at the right price, one can probably move that value what you have created into buying a house.
Thanks, Mahesh. I think you can create your own asset by first create the wealth and create the asset.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Yes,
that's another way to look at it. I think it's a very good, valuable advice to think. Dhiren, coming back after the house, the next biggest goal when you look at the young couple, I mean, normally when we look at the studies, they look for their children education. That could be the second aspirational goal, and that's a must. And what do you suggest for the child education? How they can plan for it?
It's very difficult to plan because the cost of education varies so dramatically. One is that you don't know which way the child will move. Now the number of career options, the variability of cost. Now you can have your graduation in Delhi for any cost ranging between something like 1.5 lakh rupees in a Delhi University college to private colleges which could cost you about 30 lakh rupees, 3 years of graduation. So it depends. It's very difficult to manage that. It's very difficult to predict that. But yes, one should err on the side of caution in terms of having enough will not hurt you. So save as much as you can. I would say that education is actually education is something. I have a slightly different viewpoint here. One is I'm just reminded of Kabir's doha कि पूत सपूत तो क्यों धन संचय और पूत कपूत तो क्यों धन संचय. Either way, so no, but still the realities of the modern life is different. You need to really support and supplement child's education so that he's not deprived of the available avenue. But so I would say that prepare for do some estimation and invest for the and don't think of a child plan or some such thing. If it's a newborn child and the grandparents want to gift some money, invest in equity for 15-20 years. So, as you get closer to that, just be in equity and try and save as much as possible. And I would say that a lot of people think that they have to really take care of the child. Provide him 20% of a very expensive education he is going for. Encourage him to borrow that money. Education loans are also very cheap, and I think that will also drive the child to being financially more responsible.
Thanks, Dhiren. I mean, it's a good to make the financial discipline to the child to come. But here I come back to you, Mahesh. For a child education, do you prefer an equity fund or is it better as a hybrid fund?
So again, it all depends on what's the time horizon you're looking at, right? When do you start planning for your child's education? I mean, if you've got enough time horizon, like Nirendra mentioned, I mean, after you start planning it from the child is born, and you've got say 15-20 years before he actually gets into that college, I think then one can look at an equity fund because over a longer term, the volatility what is there in the interim doesn't really matter, and equity obviously would give you a larger return over there. But still, I think not everything starts at the early stage, right? You start planning for your child education at different points in time. So in that context, I would say a hybrid fund would probably make more sense because in a hybrid fund, typically you would have 70% is equity and 30% is debt. To some extent, it reduces the volatility in the equities. And what you have seen is that over a longer term, the return because of the natural asset allocation which happens in a hybrid fund, wherein in a bullish market, you automatically allocate some money, what gains you made in equity towards debt. That ensures that over a longer term, the returns in a equity fund and hybrid funds are not too different. I mean, the return differential will be probably 150 basis points, but at least it leads to lower volatility in that period. And I think I would say hybrid fund could probably make more sense because normally time horizon available would be say around 5 to 10 years typically is what you would look at. So hybrid fund gives you almost the similar returns as equity in the longer term, but with much lower volatility.
Thanks, Mahesh. It's not only lower volatility, but it's also auto asset allocation for them now. Yeah. Thank you so much. And Dhiren, it's the last question for this. Like if I look at young couple, not that one definitely the aspirational goal is to have a house, then the child education, but intermittently most of them today, if you can look at, they want to have a holiday either yearly or once in 3 years. How do you suggest that? I mean, there is a EMIs which happens on the holidays. Do you suggest anything they can park in a emergency fund or liquid funds? What is your
No,
suggestion?
I think, yeah, one should actually one should go on holidays, but one should go on affordable holidays, which should be, budgeted for. And I would encourage, I would strongly urge nobody to borrow money to go on a holiday. So the only way of doing it is a reverse EMI. Do your small SIP, and which is earmarked to this. If you get lucky before that, if you thought that you'll go to Switzerland 1.5 years from now, and if you get lucky with the markets, and invest in a balanced fund, because it's a negotiable goal. You can well go after 6 months, you can well go after 1.5 years. So instead of borrowing money and incurring interest, accumulate your savings in a venturesome way to go on a holiday. Never break your big plan for that holiday.
Thanks, Dhiren. I think even for a holiday, you can start your SIP, and then you can enjoy your holiday. I think thanks to both of you for this sharing your wisdom for the young couple, what they can do with their money. And here I have some questions before we wind up. And and here is the first question goes to Mahesh. Mahesh, here is a question coming from Mr. Viresh. And he says, I have a lump sum money of 5.5 lakhs. I want to use them as a down payment for the house. What earlier we thought as well. And I required any time over the next 1 to 2 years, but which I don't need the money. Can I invest that money into the equity?
So, I mean, 1 to 2 years is not a right time frame to invest into equities. I would advise that that money can be looked at putting into, say, liquid fund, or probably some kind of a debt fund, a short-term debt fund. I think would be more appropriate, where you could get slightly better returns with lower volatility, and you can take out your payments, okay, whenever you want, okay, to make the down payment. Or probably possibly if you want some flavor of equity, then kind of a hybrid fund which has got a larger debt component, MIP could be another option, okay, which one can look at.
Thanks, Mahesh. And Dhiren, here is a question for you. It's coming from Mr. Rohit. Would you suggest investing in Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana for higher education of my daughter? She is 5 years old.
I would. Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana is, ultra safe, but it yields a fixed income, and for this time period, it is also, it yields an income which is tax free. But I'm confident that you will. This will not be. You will be much better off investing in an equity fund or a hybrid fund for the next, for a 5-year-old child, and you need the money 15 years from now. You'll be much better off with a balanced fund or a equity fund with your SIPs over this time period.
Thanks, Dhiren. And this is a question for you, Mahesh. It is a question coming from Jitin. I am self-employed and find it difficult to commit a fixed amount of SIPs. And how should I invest in equity funds for my long-term goals in the given scenario?
So I think, it's better normally if you have a regular source of income, you have a monthly SIP or a fixed amount, but it's not necessary to always do that. You would have incomes coming in at various points in time. Another way to do is through a STP route. Okay, you can keep some money. If you have volatility in income, you can park that inflows into a liquid fund temporarily or a arbitrage fund, and then from that fund you can move steadily into equities over a period of time. So that's how you can manage your investments into equity.
Okay, thanks, Mahesh. And it's a typically used to use systematic transfer plan kind of it.
Yeah, so keep that money into a kind of a liquid fund or a arbitrage fund, and then from that one can transfer it into equities over a spread over, say, a one year time frame.
Thank you. And here is a question for you, Dhiren. It is coming from Pramila Srivatsav. My son is 30 years old and earns 18 lakh per annum. Should he invest in NPS for his retirement?
First and foremost, ask your son to ask his question, because if a 30-year-old child and you still have to worry about this, and NPS is a reasonable investment avenue, but it's, there are certain advantages of NPS and there are certain disadvantages of NPS. I think the biggest advantage of NPS is that you put your money and you can't take out till you turn 60, which many people will look at it as a disadvantage. The other is that 40% of your money has to be necessarily converted into annuity when you retire. Rest of the money you can take out, but over the next 5, 10, 15 years or 30 years it can change. the maximum allocation, equity allocation in NPS can be 75%, which otherwise you can invest, all your savings into equity. And so if I would say that if you are looking at it as a tax saving vehicle for the first 1.5 lakh rupee, just close your eyes and invest in an ELSS and keep doing it. Rest of the money, maybe additional 50,000 NPS is still attractive for that additional ATCCD thing. But beyond that, and if your son happens to be a disciplined person, he is going to make sure that he is not going to, he is not going to be a conspicuous consumer of the accumulation. Then an all equity vehicle for a 30-year-old person is a great way to carry on.
Thanks, Dhiren. And here is a question for you, Mahesh. It's a question coming from Anshul. And Anshul says, the question is, how long should one wait before exiting from non-performing or underperforming mutual fund?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Okay, what's the right time? I think normally for equities and for different styles, there are different styles which are there in equities. There could be thematic funds, and also for the fund manager to be able to demonstrate his abilities and his skills. I think typical time frame is around 3 to 5 years. 3 years is minimum, I would say, but I think ideally it's a 5-year time frame, which one should be looking at to really evaluate and see that the fund manager is able to perform across market cycles. Because there are different styles which work well in a particular market phase. There are other styles which could do well in other market phase. But somebody who has done well across a market cycle and how is that performed, I think would be a good way to evaluate. If somebody has not delivered over a 5-year time frame, I think then one can look into switching to another fund.
Thanks, Mahesh. Thanks for that answer. And Dhiren, here is a question extension coming from Mahesh's answer. Here is a question coming from Mr. Amit. He says, how frequently should an investor review his mutual fund portfolio?
One is that how often one should look at it and how often one should review it. One is that, we are curious to look at things, so looking at it is not a problem. But if you are actively going to review it, then important thing is that, you can review it as many times as you want to. But what will you review? Because many a times people are disappointed by the negative return. And that is the time when the whole market might be, the index would have gone up, most equity funds will be down. So how do you look at it? Just feeling sad about a negative return. So reviewing it objectively is the key thing. What one should look at? I think the most important to look at is, do you have the variables which, I liked one fund and I liked one fund for 2-3 reasons. If those reasons have disappeared, I should consider a change. People don't look at it very objectively. When I look at a fund, I like a fund because it did better than peers. It did beat the benchmark. It was costing reasonably, and it has done well over a full market cycle. If these variables have not changed, don't change your fund just because you are getting negative return, or many a times, extraordinary positive returns, people get attracted to that fund, but it may not have these variables. It may not have the performance over a full market cycle. It might be assuming great risk, but people are getting impressed by the short-term performance. So be objective with your review. I think the biggest reason when one should review is when your goals change. You were 10-15 years away from your retirement, but now you are 2 years away from your retirement. You need to change. So your circumstances change, you need to do a review. Another thing which one should keep in mind in the review is rebalancing. You have decided that you will keep your equity and debt to 50% equity, 50% debt. Now because of the big decline in the market, your equity has actually become 35%. This is time to rebalance. Do you have the rules in place? Do these kind of reviews. Have objective review framework and then do an annual review. Doing an annual review has an advantage. It will also be very tax efficient.
Thanks, Dhiren. It's very insightful answer. It's truly one has to follow the rebalancing strategy. Mahesh, here is a question coming on from Mr. Shambhu, and he says, should one stop the SIP when the market turns bullish or enter into a euphoria, and what shall I do?
So SIP essentially one starts because you don't know, right, when the market is topped out or where the market has bottomed out. So I think that discipline about SIP, okay, the regular income which you are getting and trying to create wealth on that, I think that SIP should continue irrespective, because nobody knows where the market top is, right, and where it's going to kind of crap out. So I think normal SIPs which you have as a part of your normal savings which you put for wealth creation, and that should continue irrespective of what the market phase is. Obviously, asset, as Dhirendra mentioned, the rebalancing of your portfolio, okay, automatically I think that should be at the back of the mind. Like for example, if equity allocation has gone up because the markets have done very well, and that could be one side that reallocate and then to recalibrate your SIP. But otherwise, I think one should continue to do that. Obviously, if you want to make some lump sum investment, and then that I think time when one should be careful in terms of looking at where the market cycle is. Very difficult to understand that, but you have various other parameters to look at. What is the PE multiple historically? How is it expensive vis-a-vis the long-term PE multiple? There are some other techniques which are there for one to decide. Okay, what should how aggressive one should be in terms of investing into equity at any point in time, looking at the valuations.
Thanks Mahesh, thanks for that answer. And Dhiren, I'll come to you. This will be the last question which is coming today. It's a question coming from Krishna. It's a very interesting question. I remember you answered such questions earlier which I have seen. I have about 15 multi-cap funds in my portfolio. Now want to consolidate them. How can I choose the funds which shall be retained, and also how should I move the money in lump sum? Shall I move it from the lump sum or over a period of time using SWP?
Yes, this is a fairly, it's a frequently asked question, and it is a very common phenomenon. Investors invest in mutual funds, and then they are told that investing in mutual fund is a good idea, and then they just go about doing, doing it over and over again. This does not add value, and having 15 multi-caps, there is a possibility that you just might be having a underlying portfolio of all your mutual funds will be just like an index fund, and you are incurring the cost of an actively managed fund. So you need to really choose some 2, 3 or 4 equity multi-cap funds can actually fulfill most of your needs. Which one to choose? Choose the ones which have the longest period of consistent outperformance. A great mutual fund is one which actually falls little less than most other funds in a falling market, rises little more, and this can be demonstrated only on a full market cycle. And this market cycle is not an annual cycle, not what happened in 2017 or 18. What happened over a long period of declining phase of the market or long phase of rising phase of the market. If a fund has done this, then choose those funds, and I'm sure you will not have more than 3, 4 of them. So that's one. Then comes how you should realign that. So once you have chosen 4 of your 15 funds, which means 11 funds money you have to redeem and move that money to the remaining 2 other 4. Keep it equal, and which means and you can move all your money to these funds in a lump sum, because you have the whole idea of averaging your investments is to eliminate the possibility of catching a market high. Now, as you are already invested in equity, you don't now have to perfectly time it. Just move the money to other equity fund. The only thing is that our mind gets locked to, if you are assuming that you have 15 lakh rupees spread over 15 funds, and now you have decided that all my money will be consolidated in 4 funds, and you are going to redeem your 11 funds, and the 11 funds will be worth, assuming it is 11 lakh rupees. You will be mentally locked to that. I moved my 11 lakh rupees to these funds, and now so just forget about at what price and at what value it is happening. Spread that money equally among these 4 funds and carry on.
Thanks, Dhiren. I think its advice is make it simple and don't make it complicated. And before we conclude, Mahesh, since you are here, it's most valuable to have you here, and having an experience in equity over 20 years and with managing 100,000 crores of money. What is that you advise today to investors in the current market scenario on the equity? And probably you have visited earlier this question little, but what is your concluding remark for the investors at large, and more so the young couple today, those who are looking for financial independence?
Yeah, so my advice would be that equities, I think there are periods where the confidence in equities go down because of the market sentiment which is there. I think don't let that guide your investment decision and your investments into equity, because I think we have seen that time and again. We have seen many ups and downs in the market. We have seen many periods where things are looking hopeless. But I think if you stick to your discipline I think you will make fairly decent returns from market even from these levels. We are in a period where there is turbulent times globally as well as domestically, but I think looking at the economy growth, long-term growth of the economy, I think equities could fairly give you around, say, low teens kind of a return. Your return expectations have to moderate down compared to what it was in the last decade or so, because overall we've seen a growth level across the economy is slightly lower, and inflation has also been lower than what used to be earlier. So I think you should look at in that context what kind of a returns you are likely to get in equities is what I would say. And I think keep the discipline of asset allocation, because it's important to diversify. While equities on the longer term have given good returns, don't put all eggs in one basket, and it's better to diversify across asset class, whether it is debt, equity, even gold as an asset class, okay, in the right context depending on a risk appetite. I think that discipline, if you maintain, I think your experience in terms of wealth creation journey should be fairly good.
Thanks, Mahesh. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. It's a really a great advice for all of us. And thank you so much for watching us on Investor Hangouts, which is coming from Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund in association with Value Research. Today we have two great individuals here with a rich experience. And stay tuned. This is the second series of financial independence. Third one will be coming after a week, and we look forward to have you all. Thank you so much.